Well, thanks for joining us this week on Beyond the Dirt. As you can see, we're set up here in the office. We got some rain coming down today. Had a snow front that moved through yesterday and kind of interrupted some of our plans. We've been trying to get out this week to do a little bit of goose hunting, but missed our opportunity yesterday, and now the weather's not looking good, and we've got a backlog of closings to get ready for. So we're just in the office today, getting caught up on some of that. Thought it'd be a good opportunity to talk to you about one of the most frequent questions that we get asked as land brokers and land agents. It seems like invariably, anytime we run into somebody, they find out we're in the land sales business. First question they want to ask is, what are land prices doing? It's a very common topic, whether it be casual conversation or someone's really curious, but it's a very broad topic. There's so many variables that go into what a specific piece of property is worth that it's really tough to answer that in a very short window. The very basic and short answer is it just depends. Depends on where you are, what type of property it is, what the market's doing. But today, having that we're inside and we have a little bit of time to spend talking about the topic, we're going to try and dive into that topic of what are land prices doing and break it down into more of farmland segment and recreational value. There's a lot of subsegments underneath those two topics or two categories of land, but generally speaking, farmland has kind of its own track and recreational has a different track. So we'll try and break it down starting really wide, talk about the macro level from a global scale, try not to get too heady and get through that pretty quick, and then all the way down to the specifics of a particular property. What's going to make that property worth more in today's market, and maybe look a little bit into what's the future potentially hold. When you talk about farmland values, one of the things that you have to be aware of is that we're dealing with a global economy. And whether we realize that or not, as we're walking through our small towns and going through our daily lives, it's very possible that the field right across the road, the food coming from that crop field, could be feeding a family in China. So as we think about farmland and how values are impacted, you have to be aware of the global economy. Um, Supply and demand is affects everything we do from a purchasing standpoint, and land values are no different. So as we think about supply, land's a finite resource. There's only so many acres you're going to be producing crops or food in a given year, whether that's hogs or cattle or crops, beans and corn, wheat and all the other ones. You have a finite amount of area that can produce those crops, and so the supply, while you might have a few acres, small percentage every year going in and out of production, your supply is somewhat fixed. Um, Things that would impact that are things like the advent of hybridization of corn. When they figured out how to hybridize corn, the amount of production was greatly improved. So you needed less acres, produce the same amount of food, overall supply goes up. So the supply side, think of that as somewhat fixed when it comes to farmland. And then on the demand side is generally where you see the most variability. Your population growth, um, diets, and how they change across the globe. Those are probably two of your biggest factors that affect supply, or sorry, demand. So population growth, it's pretty well known that from 1990 to 2050, people that study populations are predicting that the population will effectively double. Currently, the statistics show that in 1990, the population is 5.3 billion people, and by 2050, the numbers are predicted to be 9.7. That's a huge swing, a huge swing. Is it possible and will it really happen? I guess time will tell. But if that happens, you can imagine the demand for good quality land that can produce food is going to dramatically improve or increase. Similarly, diets. If our diets change, we become more plant based or more meat based. As developing worlds become more established and are able to afford a healthier diet, they move more into meats. Then that puts more demand in the production of livestock and crops to feed the livestock. So when we think about land as a whole, farmland that is, supply and demand, it's really tough to talk about values on a local scale without at least thinking about how those are influenced from a global scale. One of the other things that comes to mind is that land is a tangible asset. And so, whether it's a true demand increase things like volatility in the stock market can drive people to invest in land. They want a safe haven for their property. And we've seen that this year in 2020. Back in March when COVID hit and we saw the blip in the stock market values, all of a sudden people decided that having their stocks in something like Uber or Amazon, where somebody in their garage can come up with a better widget and put those companies out of business, it was a better idea to pull that out and put it into land. We've had a number of clients currently looking for land just for that specific reason. So, as a whole, farmland, it's a global, there's global factors that impact value that have immediate impacts on a local scale. There's also, national impacts, and of course, local factors. Going into all those, we don't have enough time today to really dive into all those. We're not economists, don't claim to be, but we certainly follow a lot of them. We follow land values on a daily basis. It's a big percentage of what we spend our time on. We like to talk about all the glamorous side of being in the land business and out showing properties we get to see and see a lot of neat things and meet a lot of interesting people. But a lot of what we do is sitting behind a computer studying things like this and trying to understand what's that farm down the road worth compared to some of the other ones, and how does a global economy factor into that value as well as things that are local. So it's just something to be aware of, something to think about, and there's tons of information online if you're interested in educating yourself on that. But as we move from more of a global economy and start thinking about right here at home, first at the U.S. level and then where we are here in Iowa, we can start talking about numbers and certainly how small factors make a big change in land value. So as we move from talking about farmland from a global perspective down to more of a regional or local level, it's well documented. You can go back and look at what farmland values have done. And generally speaking, they've been relatively stably increasing over time. Obviously, back in the 1980s, we had a major correction with the farm crisis. And then back around 2014-15, we saw farm incomes drop, and then values for farmland follow that. So all of that data is pretty well documented out there and easy to research and find. You can educate yourself on kind of what's happened to date. What I want to talk about now is more what's going on today in the market, what we're seeing locally, and kind of what we think is going to be coming down the pipe in the near term and future years. So as we start thinking about land values on more of a local scale, here in Iowa anyway, we're right here in the Midwest, in the heart of the breadbasket, some of the highest producing soils across the country. And so a lot of the individuals that had money in the stock market, that pulled it out back at the beginning of the year with the influx we saw from COVID impacts, they've been looking to us to try and find ground to invest in. So we have seen a slight spike in the demand for good quality farmland across Iowa. So that's certainly going to have a small impact on what potential values would do. In any given area, if you have some good quality land, you're probably seeing slightly more demand, and then interest rates are also pretty low. So in addition to the individuals looking from an investment standpoint, because of the stock market impacts, you're also having more individuals actually able to afford to buy land because of the interest rates. So with those two factors, we definitely have more people looking to buy land. So that's certainly going to, again, increase your demand and have an impact on what the land values are doing. As a percentage, it's hard to put an exact number on that. It's a little bit tough to do that without knowing the exact farm, the exact area. If you're in a good area where you have majority of the ground is crop ground, and there's not a lot available, if you were to put yours on the market, the land values you're probably going to get a little more today than what you typically would. The reason I say that is because, as I said, with the demand is there, it's higher, and the supply, if there's not a lot available in your area, is lower, and somebody who's an outside investor can come in and buy that ground. They can rent it out easily because there's a lot of other potential farmers in the area that would be looking to rent that. If your particular farm is in an area where there's not a lot of demand, farming isn't real strong, soil quality maybe isn't there to produce a stable crop year in and year out, smaller fields that are harder to farm, you're probably not going to see quite the impact as some of the bigger farms with majority of in crop or income producing. So those are just a few things that are kind of affecting, I would say, that have an impact based on the influx of buyers that we've seen from the stock market and the interest rates. One of the other things that we've experienced, especially here in Iowa this year, is weather impacts. We had a drought early in the year. We had derecho come through and blow down a bunch of our corn, mess up a bunch of our farm sites, unfortunately. And so with those impacts, you start playing on the supply side a little bit more than on the demand. Um, Fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you want to look at it, genetics within crops have gotten to the point where it's really tough to have a significant impact on yield. Genetics are really strong. They've, since the hybridization of corn, and all the work that's gone on to try to improve and make them more resilient in years where maybe we have a flood out in western Iowa like we did a couple of years ago that took out a bunch of crops. The rest of the country and especially the globe was able to make up for that, and so we hardly saw any impact to price whatsoever. Similarly, this year with the drought and the derecho that came through, yeah, we had a lot of acres that were wiped out. Crop insurance is there to help cover those farmers, so they're not really hurt. And by and large, the genetics help make up for it. So I would say that supply, when you think about it again, backing up from a global scale, land values, it's going to be really tough to have a major impact on them from a supply standpoint. So I think those are two things that, from a local scale, again, depending on where you are, it's tough to know without looking at a particular farm. So we got to talk in generalities a little bit. But those are two things that have impacted the market. So the farmland value report, what that is a summary of the data that has been pulled from land brokers across the state of Iowa. They break it up into the crop reporting districts and show land values over a 6-month period, how they've changed. And as of September 2020, land values have been pretty flat as average across the state. And I'm sure that's probably true across the entire Midwest. We've had a lot going on this year. Historically, in the past 10 years, we've had some crazy swings back and forth. I feel like we're still kind of coming out of that correction period that happened back in the 2014-15 time period and starting to kind of level out on more of that positive, 0.5% to 1% incremental value increase. I feel like that's probably going to be the case for the at least the short term. And then looking forward, what I expect, and it's again well documented, is we're going to start to see more farms hitting the market. I don't know for sure how that is going to impact values, but as you can imagine, again, supply and demand. If we have more farms hitting the market, values for any given particular farm in that area is going to be slightly impacted and slightly reduced. So farm incomes currently aren't in a place where they can sustain a large family, and most of the younger generations moving into the city and looking for alternative income sources. So with all that going on, again, the next 5 to 10 years, we're expecting to see that there's going to be a lot of farmers retiring, looking to potentially sell off if they don't have somebody to leave it to. And so there's going to be a big supply in the market. So, if you're looking to sell farmland right now, and it's going to be coming up in the next 5 years, you might want to start sitting down with the family and thinking about it. Is now the right time? There's investors in the area. Supply in terms of farmland on the market is still relatively low, and number of people looking's a little bit higher. Interest rates are good. They're really low as they've ever been. So there's a lot of people out there looking to buy. And if you're going to be transitioning out, it's something to certainly think about, potentially before that big flood of farms come on the market in the future. So as we talk about recreational ground value and we look back throughout history, one of the things that a lot of people can remember is you used to be able to go out and just knock on a farmer's door and get access to just about anywhere you wanted to go hunting. It seemed like right about the 90s, when hunting became more popularized, you had television shows popping up and videos being released. Everybody got this idea that they want to go out and try and kill a big deer, or they want to go on a hunting trip to shoot ducks or geese or what have you. And so right about that time is when you seen land start to get locked down. You had people leasing it. It became a little more competitive trying to get into some of these areas. And eventually it became a matter of you have to buy the ground for the most part if you really want to have access to some of the best spots. So that's what started happening. And since that time, it seems like recreational land values have increased pretty steadily over the past couple decades here. When we talk about land values, the interest rates, the buying power, those are things that are going to greatly impact any given region. Right now, they seem to be pretty strong. We talk about this year over last year. Our particular volume for our business has gone up 200 to 300% on recreational ground type transactions. Like I said, the interest rates play a huge part, and then the economics. But the other thing that's obvious is COVID. If you go into any sporting goods store right now and you look at the racks in the sporting goods section, you can't find a kayak, a fishing pole, a gun. I mean, everything is completely sold out. And it's kind of been phenomenal. For me personally, I have a really strong connection to the outdoors and just how I was brought up. But it's good to see. It's kind of rewarding and exciting to see that we're starting to have more people simply because of the fact that they can't get out and into these huge mass gatherings, baseball games. You're not doing that on the weekend or big events or gatherings with friends and family. People are turning to the outdoors for something to do. And so it's great to see from a personal level, but then also from the business standpoint. As I said, we've seen a tremendous surge in the amount of interest in recreational ground, and this year we've sold 2 to 3 times what we have in years past. So buying power has increased, demand has increased. So right now, when it comes to recreational ground, the values that we're seeing are significantly higher than they were last year. When I say significant, I think 5 to 8% range. That's a big jump for any one given year. If you think about when we talked about ag land, you might see 0.5% to 1% change. Recreational land, we're seeing drastically more than that, 5 to 8 times easy. And then on the right property, if it's set up well, it's in a good area, desirable, good access, close to the city, has utilities, maybe where somebody could put a cabin or even a house in the future. Those type of properties that's the cream of the crop, and that's what everybody's looking for. So as far as the recreational market, land values are extremely strong. If you're looking to buy ground, if your situation allows and interest rates are right, maybe it's the right time. If you're looking to sell, it's definitely the right time. There's a tremendous amount of people out there looking. It's kind of a seller's market right now. So that's kind of a recap on what we're seeing with land values. We try to break it down from farmland, recreational values. It's a tremendous amount of area to cover, and that's why when people stop you in an elevator or at the gas station or wherever you are, and they say, "What are land values doing?" It's a tremendously wide and vast topic. The short answer is always it depends, and the long answer is call me and we'll talk about your specific property sometime when you've got an hour to really dive into it. So that's what we've got today. Hopefully it wasn't too dry and boring for you. A little bit of more informational segment. Hopefully the weather will clear up. We'll get out and hunt some birds again here in the next week or so and try to bring that to you next week. Until then, hopefully y'all get out, enjoy some time with family here over the Thanksgiving holiday, and remember to stay safe.